Well, in Sri Lanka, they already have spiraled out of control. On Monday, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned. It was supposed to be a concession, sort of like a peace offering to end the protests. But the opposite happened. Protesters were emboldened by their victory. They were not satisfied with Mahinda's resignation. They wanted his brother and President Gotabaya to resign. And this set the stage for a showdown. Opposition protesters on one side, Rajapaksa loyalists on the other. What followed was absolute chaos. At least 7 people were killed in violent clashes. More than 200 others were injured. 41 homes of ruling party leaders were torched. Private cars and bikes were burnt. Buses and state symbols were attacked. It was absolute lawlessness in Sri Lanka. The target was the Rajapaksa clan. 3 of their houses were torched by the protesters. Mahinda Rajapaksa himself had to be airlifted out. He and his family were moved to a naval base in a helicopter. This is not just an anti-government protest anymore. This is the Sri Lankan spring. The people are rising up against a corrupt and authoritarian dynasty. The question is, will they succeed? A lot depends on Gotabaya. He's the last Rajapaksa standing. His response to the protests has been changing by the day. First, he suggested talks. Then he proposed a unity government. And now it's a full-blooded crackdown. Gotabaya has imposed a curfew across Sri Lanka. He has deployed the army to crush the protests. Shoot and sight orders have been issued. Could this be the president's last roll of the dice, the army? Because let's face it, the protesters are not agreeing to a resolution. And why should they? The Rajapaksas created this crisis, so their resignation should be the #1 priority, which means Gotabaya has limited options. The opposition is not engaging with him. The protesters want him out, so his only option is to crush this protest, to drive the protesters back home. But can he do that? If the army remains loyal, he can. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has strong links with the Sri Lankan army. Links that go back to the civil war. In 2005, remember, he was appointed as Secretary of the Defence Ministry. And there he controlled everything, the police, the army, the spies. Gotabaya Rajapaksa basically ran the country's defence forces. And during this time, he oversaw the military campaign against the Tamils. So all the massacres, all the extrajudicial killings, chances are Gotabaya ordered all of it. And those policies also earned him a nickname. The Terminator. That's what he's called. Even his family members call him that, the Terminator. Now, I don't want to jump the gun, but how do you think a man named Terminator handles protests? With roses or guns? The army could be Gotabaya's ticket to stay in power. Not just serving soldiers, even the retired ones. You see, Gotabaya has stacked the government with ex-officers, bureaucrats, diplomats, even paper pushers. They're all former soldiers. And all of them owe their job to this man, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But will this loyalty last? That is the big question. In public, Sri Lanka's army has been very diplomatic. They released a statement last month. I have a copy with me. This is what it says. Troops, as everyone witnessed in the past few days, have not at all interfered with any of those peaceful protesters or organizations. Nor have they acted against the interests of the state as disciplined members of an organization which brought peace to this country through immense and valuable sacrifices. This is what the army says. And the statement has 2 parts. The first part promises no interference. But what about the second part? It talks about the sacrifices made by Sri Lankan soldiers. They're talking about the civil war. The same civil war that Gotabaya and Mahinda won. So frankly, it's hard to say which way it goes. Gotabaya will want the army to stand by him. As long as he's president, the army does not have an option. We saw an example of that on Monday night. Soldiers had to evacuate Mahinda from his official residence. And from what we hear, it was a daring rescue. Thousands of protesters had breached the gates. They were hurling petrol bombs at the building, but the army marched in anyway. Like I said, they had no option. It is their duty to protect public servants. The trouble comes if Gotabaya orders a punishing crackdown. Will the generals obey? Or will they protect their fellow Sri Lankans? Either way, we can be sure of one thing. Gotabaya cannot survive this crisis alone. Just ask Hollywood. The Terminator inevitably loses. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.